Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 286 of the Fraternity Foodie podcast. I am your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. That book is available on Amazon, so go and pick up that book today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, our next guest happens to be an advisor for the Alpha Rho chapter of Sigma Pi fraternity at Missouri State. And I have to tell you, their alumni are just such amazing people. I can't say enough good things about them. You know, when you are a consultant working for headquarters, many times, you'll just sleep on a couch at the fraternity house just to save a couple of bucks at a hotel. And when I was traveling as executive director of the fraternity, and I stopped in to work with the men of Missouri State, the alumni were so gracious that they literally invited me over to their personal homes, and they had me have dinner at their homes. I slept in beds in their houses, and they made sure that I had all of the finest accommodations throughout that entire visit. But I can't say enough good things about the alumni at Missouri State. They were so caring and kind to me. And, I think the old adage is really true, which is that you remember how people make you feel. And the brothers of the Alpha Rho chapter of Sigma Pi at Missouri State made me feel really good. And that's why I know that our next guest is a volunteer for this particular chapter, because they appreciate him. Our next guest is Brian Townsend. He is a recognized leadership professional with extensive experience in a variety of settings. Most recently, he was a special agent with the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, otherwise known as the DEA. For 28 years, Brian has served in law enforcement roles at both the local and federal levels. First, he served as a police officer in Joplin, Missouri. After 5 years in Joplin, he earned a position with the DEA where he spent 23 years and held a variety of roles with increasing responsibility. Brian is very experienced in developing and delivering training, and he's collaborated with other people, schools, and organizations to implement leadership and other training programs to foster growth and communication tools that improve successful education programs. Utilizing his background and his experience as a law enforcement officer and as an educator, Brian founded Eagle 6 Training to deliver speaking, training, and consulting services all over the world. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Of course, it's my pleasure. It's always good having a brother of Sigma Pi on our show. And so, I want to go way back. I want to go back to the undergrad days. You actually decided on Missouri Southern State University for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, why did you choose Missouri Southern?
Yeah, I actually grew up on the East Coast. A good question. I grew up in Northern Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. And, quite frankly, I didn't know who I was. I needed a change in my life. And academically, I was an average student. In fact, fun fact about me, my high school guidance counselor told me I needed to avoid college, that I would struggle, it would be a waste of money. But I knew I had more potential than that. A good friend of mine's mom actually went to Missouri Southern, knew we were interested in criminal justice, recommended the program. And the thought of going across the country to a place I knew no one and a chance to reinvent myself was something that I wanted to do, and no regrets.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, there's so many college students that really are kind of lost, have no idea what direction they're heading. I do think that there's a lot of assessments out there that can help students to try to figure out some direction. And so we can certainly talk about some of those things, but I'm glad that you found your way, and clearly it all worked out. Whatever you did, it worked out just fine. And, you joined Sigma Pi fraternity there at Missouri Southern. So what was special about the men of Sigma Pi that made you want to join them over, let's say, other organizations on campus?
I actually went to school with no intention of going Greek, of not joining a fraternity. It intimidated me. I was meeting a lot of people on campus, and some Sigma Pi's befriended me, and they weren't pushy. They weren't really about that friendship and building that bond initially. And they were a colony at the time. introducing me to some of the other guys, and everything worked out right. And I joined, and it was about 8 more months before we actually got our charter. But I'm proud to be a founding father, and it was a great opportunity for me, and just a wonderful experience.
Excellent, excellent news. Make sure you don't touch your laptop. I want to make sure that we don't miss any words that you might be saying to us. So I want to make sure that we catch all of that audio. I think maybe when you're touching the laptop, I think it gets a little shaky. But yeah, I mean, suffice it to say, you're absolutely right. As a founding father at Missouri Southern, there's no question that you had an amazing experience. All the founding fathers that I talk to on the show, or founding sisters for that matter, they're all wildly successful. There's something about that chartering process and building something from the ground up that really translates to wild success when you get out, and you graduate, because building something from nothing is just very normal for you. You're like, yeah, okay, we'll put in a constitution, we'll put some bylaws together, we'll start policies and procedures, we'll have manuals for everything. And it's just something about building something from the ground up that just translates to business success. And I think you're another example of it. So I
I,
think that's fantastic. That's really, really good. And as I mentioned in the intro, you served as chapter director now for the Alpha Rho chapter of Sigma Pi at Missouri State. What made you want to give back as an alumnus? I mean, we both know alumni that really don't give back in any way. So why do you want to give back?
Being Greek just changed my life. It was, like you said about being a founding father, it just opened up so many opportunities and lifelong friendships. And I was learning valuable leadership lessons that I had no idea I was even learning, especially as I took on more roles and more positions within the fraternity. And now being able to volunteer my time and being able to give some of my perspective, if I can offer some advice to help share a lesson or have an impact on young people, then it makes me feel good.
Yeah, it makes me feel good too. I mean, we all want to feel useful. We all want to feel needed. We all want to feel like we have some greater purpose in life. And I think, being a volunteer myself before I became executive director, that's what I felt. I felt that the students, really appreciated the time that I spent with them. I think, for me to give back in their chapter meetings and give them advice and mentoring, I know how much it meant to the undergrads. And so I think you probably are feeling the same right now at Missouri State. So that's awesome. And I also mentioned for 28 years you served in these various law enforcement roles, both on a local and also on a federal level. So I guess I'm wondering, how did you infiltrate this transnational organized crime network, and what can our audience learn from this adventure that you had?
Being a DEA special agent, it was literally a dream come true. I mean, I got paid to do what I loved, and now I can share some of those experiences and what I learned about being in law enforcement for so long, and I'm sure anyone in the military can relate, is a lot of our skills translate into other sectors. We think that because I wore a gun and badge for 28 years that's all I can do, and it's just not true. For instance, risk management. I mean, I was in very dangerous situations. I managed very dangerous situations. I know a lot about risk management because of that, and it's a skill that's translatable. So that actually happened early in my career. I was working a local target who was selling methamphetamine and marijuana, and I was able to infiltrate the organization and deal directly with the source of supply in Mexico.
Wow.
We were able to lure them to right outside of Dallas, and I met them in an undercover capacity, and where we arrested them. And like I said, now I get to actually share some of these experiences in my post law enforcement career. And instead of just telling an interesting story, I wanted to share valuable leadership lessons that anyone can relate from my experiences.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing book, or an amazing movie, for that matter. It's a number one, just see what it was like to infiltrate that, and then number two, what in the world can we learn from this lesson? So I think that's just fascinating. Some of these experiences. I mean, I must have seen a movie about this somewhere along the line. I must have.
I'd be happy to make a movie. So,
All right. So any movie producers,
all right.
just make sure you contact Brian and he'll tell you all about it. I think that's awesome. So, all right. So you have this training program. It's called Leading from the Front Line. Tell our audience, what can today's college students and student leaders learn in this particular program?
So this actual training is for first line supervisors, people who lead from the front line. And I believe these people have the most impact on culture. They have the most impact on morale. Gallup conducts a study every year called State of the American Workplace, and they estimate that about 70% of an employee's engagement is determined by their manager, their first line supervisor. 70%. And when you really dive into organizations, you realize that it's kind of a gamble on who does well and who doesn't at that level. And they have so much impact that it needs to be more than a gamble. We need to do better. We can't expect these people to learn as they grow and drink from fire hoses. So that's what this class is about, and that's what this training is about, is helping these people realize that their impact and how they can do better. When I was at DEA, one of my assignments was the training academy at Quantico, Virginia, and I actually started and managed the leadership unit for DEA. And one of our big focuses was the first line leader, how impactful they are.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I've said it, all the time, numerous times to people that I've worked with at my headquarters and other headquarters. I mean, if you really want a good indication of how well a chapter is performing, just look at what's going on with the chapter president. I mean, if the chapter president is very responsive and you have a very open and honest relationship and you're communicating often, then, generally things go pretty well. If you have a chapter president that doesn't communicate at all, basically goes MIA often, then you know what? It's very likely you're going to have a problem at some point. So I think the key is to really open up those communication channels and make sure that you have regular conversations with chapter leaders. And if you have a strong chapter leader, you're going to do great. If you have a weak chapter leader, and I'm sure we've all seen, kind of the peaks and valleys in terms of leadership abilities of various students as they come to our exec boards. But if you're in one of those valleys, you just kind of know that this chapter is going to need more support because you got a weak leader at the top that isn't really able to get his or her arms around the organization. And sometimes that can be challenging. I'm sure you've seen that over the years as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they set the tone.
Yeah, absolutely set the tone. And, sometimes it's good and you can have a more hands-off approach. And sometimes you just have to recognize where you're at on that, continuum. And if you're in that valley, boy, you better be a lot more hands-on until you get through some of those rocky times. The other thing that's really cool about you is that public speaking is something that you're very passionate about. So why do you think it's important for today's college students to learn this skill of public speaking?
If you want to grow, you have to be an effective communicator. There's a quote by Lee Iacocca, who was a automotive executive for Ford and later Chrysler, and I love it. He says that you can have brilliant ideas, but if you can't get them across, your ideas won't get you anywhere. And it's so accurate. You can get on YouTube and see a video of Steve Jobs right before he was about to go out on stage. This is a young Steve Jobs from Apple who talks about puking and how nervous he was. And we all remember Steve Jobs because he mastered that stage. He did so well. I mean, when he introduced the iPhone and just it took Apple to a whole new level. And it doesn't matter if you're Steve Jobs or you're a recent college graduate. We all have a message. We all want to be effective communicators, and that's where it starts. Is just by increasing those skills. When I was at DEA, we were working with well-known schools like Notre Dame, and we were bringing leadership training to the highest levels of DEA. And we were working with consultants for Fortune 500 companies that were teaching our folks executive training. These people were literally teaching industry leaders how to get their brilliant ideas across. And it just makes sense. I mean, if you want to be effective, you have to be a good communicator.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. And Steve Jobs is really one of the best examples of it. Steve Jobs was able to articulate his vision for Apple to a large audience, and that's what people are buying. That's why people are lined up to buy an iPhone for $1,000 a pop. The reason why is because they're bought into the vision. They want to be part of this movement on where Steve Jobs and his company now are going. And so you have a lot of early adopters that are listening to his words and bought in on his vision of what he wants for the company. So I think that's a really good lesson. If you study those videos of Steve Jobs, I think that's a good lesson for today's leaders, is that you really need to articulate your vision for the organization in order to get buy-in, in order for all of those people who are in your organization to follow you. But if you don't articulate where you want to go, then it becomes very hard for people to be passionate because they don't even know where they're headed. So I think that's really important.
Yeah,
Really, really.
absolutely. It was never about the product. It was always about the vision.
It's about the vision. He never once really said it's about the product. It's about where we as a people want to see ourselves. And it just so happens that they sell iPhones. But you know what I mean. But that was kind of secondary. It was more about where we're going as a community. The other thing that I really wanted to talk to you about is media training, because it's something that very few college students know about. I know when I was a college student at the University at Buffalo in the fraternity, I had no media training whatsoever. But it's still, from time to time I see college students, speaking to law enforcement and other people in the media, and I'm like, I'm not so sure this person is qualified to do that. So what goes into media training? Why is that important?
It was actually originally developed for law enforcement. We found a need to work with the media and manage those relationships. So I've been working with a media and public relations expert to bring this training. We want people to feel more confident in dealing with the media, especially in difficult situations, because that's typically when you get those phone calls. It's not when things are going well, it's when things are going bad. So how do you get successful interviews? How do you keep your message on point? We need to, and we also need to be better at telling our success stories. There's a lot of good things that organizations do, and it shouldn't be about just picking up that phone when something wrong happened. It should be about having those relationships and picking up that phone when something good happens as well. It's just developing those relationships.
Yeah, you make a really good point. I mean, when I talk about, PR with college students, a lot of them are frustrated that all the stuff in the media is all negative. And, not talking about all the positive things that we do. But then when I ask them, okay, so what is your PR budget? The answer is zero. We have no budget for PR. Okay, what is your training program like for the PR chair? What training program? We don't have any. Okay, so how did you choose your PR chair? And they're like, well, the guy lost every election in our exec board. And so we had no other positions to give him. So we said, hey, why don't you do PR? So basically, he has no qualifications to be PR chair. Is that what you're telling me? Yes, that's correct. Okay, good. And and then the last one is, what are your metrics? How do you decide if this PR chair is successful or not? And they're like, what do you mean? We don't have any metrics. We don't know what you're talking about. So this is the reason why we have a PR problem in fraternity. We really have to take control of those four areas if we want to have a better reputation, if we want to talk about the positive stuff more, as opposed to just being reactive when that one bad thing happens. So hopefully that's something for our college students to think about.
Absolutely, being proactive as opposed to reactive. You hit the
Absolutely. Now, morale, I'm sure you've seen this as well. I mean, morale can be lacking in student organizations, especially now when so many of our in person events and classes have been canceled or they went virtual. So, how can we improve morale in our student organization, our fraternity, our sorority? What are some ways we can do that?
We live in challenging times. People are still figuring things out. I mean, look at all the changes we continue to make with COVID, distance learning. Life can be confusing, especially for younger people. But we need to stay focused. We need to help each other out. People want to feel safe. They want to feel cared for. When they know that they matter, they work harder. So my advice is support each other, cheer for each other. When you can create these type of positive environments, people are more creative, and like I said, they work harder. That creates growth, and it increases morale.
Yeah. I think there's something to being authentic. I think there's something to being vulnerable. I think if you as a chapter could get into a space where every brother feels comfortable sharing one really good thing that happened to them that week, and then one really challenging thing that happened to them that week, and just go around the room and just listen to that, I think we can celebrate our successes, to your point. But I also think that we also have a lot more support than we might think. And if I'm saying that, hey, I'm struggling because I'm broke, I'm a college student and I have no money. I don't know where I'm going to get money to pay the rent this month. Maybe there's another brother that overhears that and says, you know what? I just heard that there's an opening on campus, and let's go over and let's see if we can get you that position working in XYZ place on campus in the bookstore, whatever it is. Or maybe we can go together to financial aid, go to the financial aid office at Missouri State, and we'll see what solutions they have for us to make sure that I can stay here as a student without growing broke. So I think if we can get into that space to be vulnerable and support each other, like you're suggesting, then I think we'll have a better brotherhood, and I think we'll actually get the results that we want.
Absolutely.
Really nice stuff. So is there a way that, I mean, you know how to build teams. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, there's no way you did the work as DEA that you're describing unless you knew how to build a really good team around you. So how do we create a more cohesive team in our fraternity or sorority?
Personal responsibility and hold people accountable. And I'll say that again, personal responsibility and hold people accountable. When people aren't paying their dues, when they're not going to chapter meetings or events, when they're not holding their weight, it matters. It brings people down. And it's the same thing in our careers. If I work hard and I see others who don't, and then I see them not being held accountable, through ineffective management, it makes me angry. I want people to care about what they do, to have pride in what they do. So it's not unique to just Greek organizations. It's unique to all of us. I mean, we need to build cultures that expect people to do their best, and we need to build cultures that hold people accountable when they don't. It's that
Yeah.
simple.
I mean, I agree. It is just that simple. But what's not simple within, let's say, a fraternity or sorority, is to hold our brothers and our sisters accountable, because, we all have this innate need. This is how we're wired. You, me, and everybody listening. We're wired in such a way that we want to be well liked, all of us. And so it becomes really hard to hold our brothers accountable. Let's say they go and I don't know, they punch a hole in the sheetrock at the house, right? Very common problem that you and I have seen on occasion. And so when that happens, how do you hold that brother accountable? It's like, we can basically say the right thing to do is for him to repair the sheetrock, right? But then it becomes, how do we do that? How do we hold him accountable for better results? How do we send him to anger management classes so that way it doesn't happen again? And I think really the answer is having a judicial board system in place where he or she can be judged by their peers, and that they're actually going to follow through with the recommendations of this judicial board. So if it's replacing the sheetrock, if it's going to anger management classes, if it's writing a letter of apology to the brotherhood, whatever those things are, I think we need a system in place to be able to get that accountability. It's, I think, all too easy to basically say, that guy pledged with me. I'm just going to let it slide this one time, and we'll, just hope for better behavior later. No, we need accountability. I mean, that is key in order to prevent that from happening in the future.
Absolutely. We have expectations. We need to hold everybody accountable to those expectations, and we're fair and we're consistent on how we apply, punishment or consequences for those who don't, who break those rules.
Yeah. Oh, you bring up a good point too. I mean, it's got to be consistent. So if we have similar types of violations over time, we want to know that all of our brothers or all of our sisters are being held to the same standard, and that we're relatively consistent. We're not being, overly unfair to any one particular member. The point is not to, just be punitive. The point is to be somewhat educational in nature, so that way we prevent these things from happening, not only to this brother, and we fix maybe a longer term solution. It could be that this brother that punched a hole in the sheetrock, maybe this person has, an alcohol or a drug addiction problem, right? I mean, maybe it's deeper than that. So I think we have to really look at all of those things and see how do we educate and how do we help this brother out, to make him a better person over time. So, anyway, so there are some thoughts there that I think might be helpful to some of our listeners. Now, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. What is your favorite restaurant in Springfield, Missouri? The next time that the university wants to bring me in as a speaker and I get to visit the Alpha Row chapter, where should I go to get some good food in town? Because I haven't been there in a couple of years.
I got two recommendations for
All
you.
right.
The first one is Flame Steakhouse. I eat steak all around the country, and the filet mignon is absolutely the best I've had anywhere.
Wow.
It's that good.
Wow.
The other one, if you like barbecue, City Butcher Barbecue. Their brisket and their burnt ends are absolutely amazing. Again, some of the best I've had anywhere.
Wow. All right. Those are some big recommendations there. I mean, you're talking to a guy, who grew up in New York City. He knows something about some steakhouses in New York. And I currently live in Nashville, Tennessee. So I know a thing or two about barbecue as well. I'm not a novice. So I can't wait to go and check that out. So the next time I'm in Springfield, you better believe I'm going to call you, Brian, and we're going to meet for some food. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So if our audience members, if they want to book you to speak on their college campus, where in the world should they go to connect with you and learn more about your programs?
So I'm on the internet at eagle6training.com. The six is the number. So eagle6training.com. And my email is on there. My cell phone is on there, and happy to talk to anyone and travel anywhere.
Very good. Brian Townsend. It's Eagle6, the number six, eagle6training.com. Go and check out that website to learn more about Brian and his team. I think, all of his experience as a DEA certainly starts to capture your imagination. I start thinking about all these really cool movies that I've seen over the years featuring DEA officers. And I'm sure there's some great stories and some really, really great lessons that apply to student organizations. So I know Brian would be a great speaker on your campus. Well, Brian, listen, it has been great catching up with you. It's been way too long, so I'm happy that we had the opportunity to catch up here on the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So thank you for being on our show. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And like I said, we got some barbecue next time you're here.
That sounds like a plan. And to our listeners, if you like this talk with Brian, make sure that you like it on social media. Make sure that you share it on social media with other fraternity and sorority members on your campus. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us this time, and we will see you on the next episode.